Alrighty, so today we have our presentation, The Dark Side of Work Intake Groupthink with Jeremy and Tom. Jeremy and Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Katiana. Thanks for having us. We're excited to be back. This is time number 2 for us.
Yeah,
Hey,
excellent. Looking forward to this.
wonderful. Well, I will pass it on over to you two to your introductions and get started.
Sure, I get to introduce Tom. So what to say about Tom? It feels like a wedding toast, maybe, or like some sort of like engagement.
Roast.
A roast? I like that idea better.
I think
What,
it's a roast, yeah.
what to say about Tom that hasn't already been said? I mean, Tom's been in this industry for a very long time. I met Tom, back in 2017. We really got to know each other much better after we both left the place we were at and connected over the pandemic. We started writing this book. We started having, beers with one another virtually and physically, and started to think about this whole topic of work intake that we're here to talk about. But Tom's been a longtime consultant, coach, scrum master, manager, programmer, dad, grandfather, husband. Did I miss any roles there, Tom?
The podcaster.
Podcaster, yes. I knew I forgot that one. You're 800 episodes deep now? 800 plus?
800 plus.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool. It's easy for me to introduce Jeremy. Jeremy is the cool guy. So as I told my wife when we first ran into each other, this is the guy. This is the guy that I really want to like me. He's the cool guy in the organization. Jeremy is a polymath. He's a writer. He's a musician. He does all that family stuff too. Matter of fact, we meet every Tuesday while he's driving his daughters to something, right? Generally.
Yes.
So, again, works in the industry, Scrum Master, has been a writer, all of these wonderful things. Jeremy Willits.
I'm
Round of
blushing. I'm blushing. So let's get started. I mean,
Yeah, right
I
on.
tried to approximate a Halloween costume with my Darth Vader t-shirt. There is a cape, so this is not the kind of thing that I would probably
Ooh,
wear in public, but I'm wearing it for you today because we're talking about a somewhat spooky topic, Tom, and we're on the cusp of Halloween, Dia de los Muertos, All Saints Day, depending on where in the world you are, right?
absolutely. And let's face it, groupthink, zombies. That's what I say, zombies.
And you will see some skeletons here. So we took the liberty of sprinkling some somewhat fun, goofy Halloween emojis throughout this presentation. But I think that it's going to kind of work well, and it'll give us the opportunity to tee off on a couple topics as we go.
All righty. So why is groupthink a problem, Jeremy?
Well, Tom, if everybody thinks the same thing, that could be a problem.
We talk about collaboration and the whole idea. You look at all sorts of the agile literature. It's team, get together, discuss, collaborate, come to a consensus. And the answer is, in many cases, that's great, but in some cases that ends up being pablum kind of thing. And we do get to a zombieification. And when it comes to work intake, it is even crazier, right? So we go down this path of collaborating, coming to a common point when the right answer might be something much more specific and require an individualistic view of the world.
Yeah, we're not just talking about work intake, and so just to calibrate everybody on what we mean by work intake, it's like how work gets to a team, how work gets to an organization. So I always think about backlogs when I think about this topic. That's a common thing that I think about, whether it's team
That's
level
groupthink,
backlog.
isn't it?
I probably, I mean, it's, my mind immediately goes to a framework, right? And it's like that framework is very much kind of a group thinking thing. But this has an impact not only on how work comes to your team, how work comes to your organization, but also prioritization and sequencing. And those are two topics that we're going to unpack here in this next slide.
Well, let's go then.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, it's political season, right, Tom, in the US?
Eisenhower, most people probably on this call probably don't remember who he was.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're not old enough to have voted for him either.
No, not even close.
Anyway,
So
famous U.S. president, famous general. He came up with this thing called the Eisenhower matrix, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But this quote is one we wanted to start with because it's so impactful. It makes you think that about what is actually urgent and what is actually important, not only at work, but in your life. So the quote is, what is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important. So, Tom, what say you?
yeah, arguably we could argue over the seldom word, right? But the reality is when something becomes urgent, what happens? What's you get lots of noise around it. People are shouting, screaming. I'm being maybe a little bit hyperbolic because I'm a little worried about, the ghosts and the zombies coming to get me. But they get that way. And what happens to the way people think? People are conflict avoidant. They then start to focus in and come
Mhm.
to, oh, let's all avoid this. And then what happens?
Yeah, potentially bad things. But let's talk urgency and importance because those obviously appeared in that quote from General Eisenhower, but they are kind of different things. I think when I think about urgency, I think about who's yelling at you and who's coming to talk to you. I'm sure you've all had the instance where you start your workday without anything on your task board that is like a burning thing to do, but then by the end of the day you're left with what I have right now, which is a sea of pink sticky notes on my desk of things that I have to take care of probably pretty soon because uh, I perceive them as an individual as urgent. So, Tom, what say you about importance?
Importance, again, hard concept to unpack. But once you unpack it and you decide whether it's value, right? As a good agilist, we would want value to be one of the primary drivers for importance. Sometimes technology is sometimes the driver. But once we unpack and decide on what's important, that's the stuff that delivers the bacon, right? It might not be as urgent, but if we need really to, it's important for us to wrestle with the idea of AI or building large language models. If that's important to the business, then that has a lot of value. Would we do things just because they're urgent if they didn't deliver value?
Potentially, if somebody's at your desk yelling about it, I think we would love as humans, as professionals, as coaches, as people who work with teams, we'd love to think that everything we do is important and that we are people who are deliberate in how we prioritize work and we say no to the things that aren't as important. But this whole thing about having somebody there yelling at you nicely, that can engender a sense of urgency that you may not be comfortable with.
So last night on Pluto TV, I was watching World War Z again, and dodging the ads. But at one point, right? So this first time they see the zombie, guy falls down, shakes, and he jumps up and he runs over and bites somebody. I would argue that sounds like it's urgent and important. And if I was just doing something urgent, I would then have to step back. At the same time, he was trying to get his daughter out of the car. There was this intersection where there was a lot of things. Both were fairly urgent, both were fairly important. How do you come to a conclusion? And when you haven't sat down and actually thought through as a group, how are you going to judge? What decisions are you going to make? How are you going to come up with a framework or a set of human being level algorithms? It gets messy, right? It gets
Yeah.
messy.
And this is a great segue to the next slide where we talk about the matrix itself. And I'll tell you a quick story about using this Eisenhower matrix, which you see on the bottom right corner of the screen. And it's called the Eisenhower matrix because it's meant to convey that urgency and importance concept. And then the blue text in the middle is the guidance of what to do when you find the work that fits within one of these boxes. So for example, if you find something that's truly important and urgent, like getting bit by a zombie, that's something to do something about. However, if it's something that's not urgent or not important, you want to get that off your plate. So maybe it's one of the things that you have sitting in your personal backlog or your team's backlog, and you just go to Jira or Trello and hit the delete key, and it's gone forever and ever, and you purge it from your mind. But this is something I definitely want you all to think about as you're doing work as individuals, but also with teams. I know I told Tom a story about this long ago, and I'll tell you, I used this as a retrospective tool with a team one time because a team was acting like every single backlog item on their board was something that was urgent and important. And that was coming at the expense of actually achieving sprint goals. And so one of the things that I did with them is to take time at a sprint retrospective. We printed off all the backlog items from their tracking tool at the time. I forget what it was. But I asked the team members, I said, okay, I handed them out to the team. I said, okay, please put these where you think they belong in terms of urgency and importance. And inevitably, like the entire backlog got into that important and urgent column. And so then I turned to the product owner who was also there. And I said, okay, could you reshuffle these and help the team understand better where you think things are? And ultimately, he took the items, and yes, a couple of them stayed in that important and urgent column, but a lot of them shifted. And so that enabled us to have the kind of conversation that Tom alluded to a second ago. When you're working with a group and you're talking about these big concepts that can easily be misconstrued, like urgency and importance, it allowed that team to start to come to a common understanding and working agreements about the work that they were doing.
I tried something very similar relatively recently, and it did it without a safety net. And very frankly, the first thing that happened is that the development team put everything down in basically the delegate box. It was all
Ooh.
down at the bottom, except for a few technical items that were up in the urgent and important area. And then again, trying the same concept. I knew we were in deep poop at that point. Um, but then asked the product owner, and lo and behold, what happened was an absolute flip. How would you have dealt with that?
Yeah, it's almost like you use that activity to uncover like the team's motivation and like the stuff that they actually wanted to do. The stuff that they actually wanted to do was potentially some of the technical work that you just described before. Whereas when the product owner, I'm sure, thought about the backlog, if they're a traditional Scrum defined product owner, they're thinking about business value. And it's not always that business value and technical acumen meets.
Right. No, I agree. And that did expose the fact that the product owner and the team weren't working together. Again, the Eisenhower matrix is a tool to have these discussions. There are no rules around it, but in general, right, it's a mechanism to do that. And whether you
So,
call it the Eisenhower or the urgency and importance doesn't much matter.
so one question that seems relevant, we'll get to other questions in a
Let's
bit,
do
but
it.
one seem
Well,
relevant
just
for
don't
right.
give us the unrelevant ones that you
Okay,
alluded to.
they're all, yeah, mine are probably irrelevant, but anyway, the relevant ones are you not doing prioritization and sprint planning in these examples?
In the story I told, we definitely did prioritize the
Mhm.
sprint planning, but when it came time for the team to actually execute the work, they screamed like their hair was on fire as they approached every single item versus really trying to focus on getting the highest priority ones done. So it was, in my case, where I talked about doing it as a retrospective tool, we used it to validate that the team in fact had a priority list and to validate that that priority list is what they should have been following. In the case I described, I vividly remember a lot of the items that got done that particular sprint were like lower priority things that, for whatever reason, the team focused on them like they were urgent and important, and they did that at the expense of the things that were near the
Yeah,
top.
when everything is urgent, nothing is urgent, right? I mean,
Oh,
Precisely.
absolutely. It's
Well
like
said.
is everything's in the first priority, then nothing really is.
yeah,
Mine was on the exact opposite end. So it was definitely as sort of a front end part to a prioritization kind of conversation. We knew that we had trouble. But we didn't know it was that sort of polar kind of thing. And it exposed it. So we ended up stopping prioritization at that point for a period of time and had some pretty serious conversations.
Now let's talk about urgency and importance in individuals and teams. This next, I can't look at this next slide and not think of that Emerson, Lake and Palmer album cover. I don't remember what the name of the album is, but man, it looks
I
just
told
like
you,
it.
he's a musician.
Just like it. So yeah, we've talked about urgency and importance, tried to define that. But I think when we get together with people and try and have these conversations around urgency and importance, we see different things. And so groupthink, I think, is the first thing we see, and I've definitely seen this one. It's particularly with teams. It's the example I gave you a minute ago about how that one particular team had started to literally treat everything as urgent and important because it was in the sprint backlog. Oh my goodness, if it's in the sprint backlog, it must be urgent and it's all important and we have to get it all done. Never mind what our actual goal is for the sprint.
You know, teams, there's psychology to teams, whether it's the idea of people not really trying to force people to the center, to the core, sort of confluence of the team, I think misses the point of what a team does. So again, because a team can fall into that hole of trying to be conformity, because we try to avoid conflict and pain and all that good stuff just as normal human beings, that then causes a homogenization and squeezes out differences of opinion.
Shared information bias. So this is the one when I think about this, when I think about like if you've got a group of 10 people and like 3 of them all were part of one conversation and the other 7 weren't, then the 3 people, when they talk about urgency and importance, you can sort of hear them picking and choosing their words carefully, making eye contact with the people in the group that they know about the certain conversation. Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what you just did, Tom. It's like they know who knows the information and they're sort of like gatekeeping information, but then it becomes, well, we know this thing, but we aren't necessarily going to share it with the wider audience, but you should listen to what we're saying. And it sort of ties even to the social influence and conformity example you talked about, Tom.
Yeah, many of these problems or attributes tend to overlap. Decision-making processes. Again, we tend to create decision-making processes not only with teams and groups and organizations that really try to keep people on the straight and narrow, keep them within the boundaries of the organization, and create conformity.
Uh,
That is a problem.
Yeah, risks and rewards. So when I think about this, when I think about the place that Tom and I used to work, it was pretty easy to see who got rewarded. It was the people who did something when they got yelled at, or they did something when a customer's hair was on fire. It happened every Monday in our company-wide meeting. And for the people who didn't get reward, I was never rewarded a player of the week because I just didn't have to do that. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, let me tell you about the place, and someday we will. I'll tell you about the place where you could tell who was the top firefighter of the month or a couple of months because they all had $5,000 watches on. And that was part of the bait, right? To keep people and that's the reward. So they ended up trying to jump to the head of the queue. I don't know what they would have done if they got multiple of those, huge $5,000 Rolexes. And that's no hyperbole in this one. Priority setting. We all know that priority and sequencing are 2 very different animals. But deciding what's the highest priority is, if you're using 100% groupthink, then you're going to get what the group thinks, not necessarily the person down at the end who's the introvert who doesn't get involved in the conversation, who actually knows that if we don't do this couple of stories, then all the rest of them are going to sit around because you're not going to be able to test them or put them in.
Yeah, last one before we get to our activity here in a slide. The individual versus the group perception. So this is like one of 2 cases. This is like I'm better than the group because either I know something different, I'm more mature. The needs of the individual outweigh the needs of the group. Isn't that sort of a popular phrase from literature somewhere?
Star Trek.
Star Trek, maybe. There you go. but I think I know I've seen this a lot, and I'm guessing that you all have too. When we try and work with teams and we try and build teams, I've worked with teams where one individual refuses to become part of that team and refuses to assimilate with that team for whatever reason. And so, again, these are challenges as we talk about things like work intake or prioritization or sequencing.
I see Dave has his hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just sort of curious, because, I'm a Scrum Master and also an Agile coach, but I mean, my understanding of Scrum is that I've had this conversation many times previously, but my understanding of Scrum is, the product owner's responsibility is to make the decisions as to what's important, but the developers are the one that estimate the work. So I'm not really understanding, I guess, the idea of groupthink, at least in this capacity, because my understanding is this is not the role of the developer. And I used to be a developer. I mean, I was given my work and I had the freedom to implement the work no matter how I wanted to do it within reason. I did have leads who peer reviewed my work, but I didn't have the freedom to decide what I wanted to do. My job was to get the job done. So, in my opinion, this is the role, what we're talking about here is the role of the product owner. This is not a vote, at least if you're doing Scrum.
Well, I think it is though, and to be honest with you, I'm with you. I understand that the the product owner, because I'm a Scrum Master too. So the product owner prioritizes the backlog, but they don't do it all by themselves, right? They don't do it outside of interfacing with groups of their stakeholders, because unless they're the only stakeholder, they're going to have to come up with probably a consensus decision at that point. They really shouldn't be doing it without having those interactions with the technical team, because let's face it, nice good business product owner, which I'm all in favor of, talked about that all morning with another organization, great, but sometimes they don't, they need other input, not only stakeholders, but from the technical stuff. All of that ends up coming together. And again, we don't want that to homogenize down. I agree. We want to have, in this case, in terms of making the prioritization decision, somebody needs to have that high point, product owner in this case. But they also probably have to weigh in, or at least understand all of the urgency and importance from all of the other parties to make that kind of a decision.
Well, I agree from the standpoint that they do have to talk to the development team to make sure that it's feasible. But the product owner, at least in my experience, goes to, let's say, whoever the client or the customer, or if it's internal, and it's their job to prioritize what the customer, client, whoever internal actually wants. But I do agree that they have to go to the development team and say, hey, this is what we're doing. However, is this feasible before we go and do it? But it's their job to prioritize. I mean, that's what's in the Scrum guide if you're doing Scrum.
Yeah, I
And the
know what it's there.
developers, develop.
But again, the development folks are stakeholders. They will have an opinion, and that opinion can't be just cut off and thrown over the wall. Otherwise, we're not doing Scrum either. Go ahead, Jeremy.
I was just going to echo that. I'm thinking as Dave's talking, Dave brings up some really, really valid points.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked with teams in the past, and I'm sure Dave has, and you probably have too, Tom, and others have, where the product owner and the team don't get along. And that doesn't create a great dynamic either. I mean, we talked about homogenization of thought, and we'll talk about some of the more dark work intake patterns when it comes to groupthink here in a minute. But like the opposite dynamic, where the team is literally just order takers from the PO, or they have like some ability to dictate the how of the work, that's not a great dynamic either. We want to build strong teams with strong POs and strong developers that can communicate and have rich, sometimes contentious conversations about the work, about technical paths, about why something is necessary to do. Let's get to our exercise. Let's move on and get to our exercise.
Happy to continue the conversation when we're done here. Okay. We'll get to the next question after this.
Yeah, Samantha in the chat beat us to this next one. So we want you to grab a sheet of paper or some sort of electronic thing. And we're going to use this. This is a multi-part kind of thing. And we'll just give you like a minute or so to do this. This isn't really elaborate. Can you go to the next slide, Tom? Grab a sheet of paper.
But yeah, okay.
Grab a sheet of paper. Hopefully you have fingers, unlike the people in this AI generated photo that we've been looking at for a little while that people have been poking at in the chat, which is excellent. But go ahead and grab a sheet of paper, create two columns, one with issues at the top, one with solutions at the top of the other column. And so think about the urgency and importance thing we just talked about. So again, urgency is like you're being yelled at to do something, or maybe you're like Jeremy and got a bunch of new sticky notes that emerged on your desk after a couple of conversations this morning. Those things get perceived as urgent. Importance, though, if you think about the Eisenhower quote, sometimes those urgent things aren't always important and vice versa. So I'm interested to see if you all can give some thought to 5 issues that groupthink, so again, groupthink, the entire group thinking the same way, can cause when it comes to urgency and importance. And so Samantha dropped one in the chat previously, but if you could think about that for a second and share one issue that you think is like the most serious impact of groupthink on the whole urgency and importance dichotomy.
And I've just turned on the 1-minute timer, Mr. Willits.
Thank you. And if you have an issue identified already, please drop that in the chat.
Hmm.
All right, a couple ideas are coming in. Let me get down there in the
5,
chat.
4.
Yeah. Security issues versus new features, conformity to a preordained solution and implementation without using data. Thank you, Joe. Emily had a couple, lack of innovation, resistance to continuous improvement, tribalism. Yep.
Yeah, unwelcoming culture, lack
Yeah.
of creativity.
Oh, collective
Security issues.
rationalization. Tom likes
Ooh.
rationalizing things.
I like that line. Ooh, thank you, Kevin.
How about a Mark Twain quote, Tom? It's time.
Never the twain shall we meet. So Mark Twain, you know, just because everyone thinks a certain way doesn't make it right. I love the quote here from Mark Twain. Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. And that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means it's time to step back and make sure that you're not using it. It's not being used as confirmation bias, or you're not using the whole group as collective rationalization. Those are all great things. I'm picking them off the meeting chat. But the reality is we have to have diverse thought in teams so that we get more information, so that we make the correct choices, so that we understand, even if we're just sequencing, that we sequence things in the proper order.
Yeah. So let's talk the dark side. Let's talk the Darth Vader side of all this equation. So a couple people, I think, nailed a couple of these in the chat. We'll go through these, but I think a couple people came either really close or sort of nailed them.
Our job is done here. I gotta go get my
group
Reese's cups so I can hand them out now.
This group is very wise. They've detected the AI people in our slides. They've detected the different dark side causes. So the first one, suppression of innovation and dissenting views. Well, I think we saw this one pop up in the chat. You alluded to it a minute ago, Tom, with diversity of thought. I mean, the Mark Twain quote, in fact, alludes to this somewhat. It's like if everybody's thinking the same way, that tends to be a problem. That tends to lead to the stop me if you've heard this one before. This is the way we've always done it. It very much leads to that mode of thought. And I know Tom's heard that one before. My goodness.
The worst part is I heard it at 9:37 this morning, and I was pretty precise when I wrote it down in my journal here. It's like, oh my, great way to start a course. Risk aversion. Again, if the majority, if you're focused on just one decision and really using the group think to isolate anything that's coming from outside, it's hard to point out that there might be a problem. It's hard to tell the emperor that he or she has no clothes.
Yeah. Homogenized prioritization. So Jamie alluded to this one a little bit ago when she talked about if everything's important, then nothing's important, or if everything's urgent, then nothing is urgent. This is one that, again, it's people's perception of that whole urgency and importance thing. And when you talk about scaling that awareness from an individual and each individual's perceptions to what the team perceives something as, what a larger organization perceives something as, man, that gets tough quick.
And related to risk aversion, conservative decision making. So again, it's hard to step out. It's hard to be that tall tent pole.
Number 5, the neglect of external changes. I mean, this one, I kind of think back to some of Tom and my adventures at our last company where, the majority of the world had taken their products to the cloud by what, 2012, 2013, or at least was starting to do that. And then, our company wisened up and decided to do that like 4 years late. And, it was kind of an acknowledgement that like, hey, we had ignored what was going on in the marketplace for a very long time. And we had done that at, I think, eventually our company's peril. I think the place that Tom and I used to work has gone through some pretty impactful changes over the past few years. None of them have been really positive. But I think that's in no small part due to like the fact that that place neglected what was going on in the rest of the world in that particular software industry for a while.
We're in the same category with the basic overconfidence, and it's easy to, once everybody believes in the same thing, to be overconfident and therefore end up in the wrong place.
Cultural reinforcement. So when I think about this one, I think about, people who work in teams or people who work in larger areas who have opinions that may differ from everybody else, like the Mark Twain quote said, who eventually get ostracized. They get, called not a team player. They get perhaps, in the performance review impact by not having the same opinion as other folks. That's dark stuff. We want people to come to our organizations and our teams with diverse thought. We value that. We should value that. But sometimes it gets penalized.
And if you don't act when things truly are urgent and they're not just important, that they're urgent, that's death to an organization. And I can point at half a dozen that have fallen down that path. The hippo idea that's in the chat, the person with the highest paid person's opinion, or the highest paid person in the room kind of a scenario, is a form of a number of these, right? These dark sides. And it can really cause a failure to act when things are important or urgent, truly urgent to act upon.
All right, so let's get to our second part of our exercise. So in part 1, you gave some thought to some of the issues. We had some people to put those in chat. We just walked through a list of 8 or so issues that we wanted to present to you. Now let's think about solutions. So for the issues that you identified, think about some solutions. I'll give them another minute, Tom, and then you can drop those in the chat when you're ready as well.
Rolling.
Yeah. anybody has solutions, please drop those in the chat. We can take a quick look at them before we move on. Okay. Thank you, Samantha. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Joe. A/B testing,
Ooh.
anonymous feedback, think,
I
write,
like
share.
liberating structures.
Yeah.
Yep. Use some of those. Like them. Asking each person's individual input. Yep.
Yeah,
thumbs
removing
up.
the group bias from the situation. Yeah, Lauren providing different outlets for creativity, group activities, encourage anonymous input. Cool.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Excellent. Ooh, silent writing. They probably did all of our work.
How about this this quote from Bobby Kotick, former CEO of Activision Blizzard? Tom, what do you think about that? Move us along.
All right. It truly is about empowerment, and we need to work. We work hard to maintain a balance between collaboration and cooperation and independence. That's what we're discussing here, right? The idea that there needs to be some frame of independence such that groupthink doesn't overwhelm what really needs to happen.
Yeah. And if you can you advance the slide, Tom? I still can't see it yet.
Oh,
But like,
sorry.
so I work in a relatively large company now, and so I maybe don't have the same groupthink challenges that you do, because I work in an organization of like 55 teams trying to build these really large hardware, software, firmware products all together. So groupthink tends to not be a problem I encounter at that level, but definitely at the team level, I encounter that groupthink challenge. But I think what Tom said is right. We ultimately want teams that are empowered to do things and teams that don't all think the same way, because that ultimately is going to lead to us developing better products.
Yes. There are solutions to this. And obviously, a lot of the solutions that are in the chat are great solutions.
They are.
That I will come back to and copy down so that we can augment the next version of our paper on this. But, facilitate clear leadership and role clarity. I mean, whether we decide that some one human being is going to make all decisions and be omnipotent, so be it. But I think there needs to be, clear leadership.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of omnipotence, there might be a person in this picture at the bottom right that is omnipotent. They have at least 3 arms that I can count. So, I mean, my goodness. I don't know where you got these pictures from, Tom, but they're marvelous.
I generated them. It was
Clearly.
fun. It was fun.
The 3-armed brainstorming solution guy. So psychological safety, I know that's a big one. I think that's much easier said than done. I think open dialogue is at least a step in the direction of psychological safety. I think that probably many folks on this call have done the thing where they've tried to facilitate some sort of awkward conversation with their team, whether it's a retrospective, some sort of crucial conversation, maybe using the material from that book to have a conversation. But man, that's one that can really make a huge impact on how a team functions in this area.
I do like the comment in the chat, right? So if you were using voting as a mechanism to understand or at least poll your group, 3 arms, 3 votes, all in, right?
It's
All
only
in.
fair.
Yeah,
It's only fair.
Well, their shirts have to cost a lot more if they have 3 arms.
They're custom.
That psychological safety is hard, and Jeremy's pointing out there is probably the hardest part of stepping out and having a conversation. Structured decision-making frameworks, using things like liberating structures, all of those are really excellent solutions. And I do like the 1-2-4 or 1-2-all.
Yeah. Diversifying information. So I know we've talked a couple times now about how information is kind of a currency. It can have a big impact on these discussions. And so I encourage you and your team to like break outside of the normal information that you get and go seek feedback elsewhere. I think one of the things I remember vividly about the company that I'm working at now is that when I joined, I was asking, so like what feedback do we get from customers about our products? What's the feedback we get? And one of the responses I got was, well, we can't tell the engineering teams the feedback we get. They might be disappointed by the feedback that we get.
Identifying that you have a groupthink problem and then starting to mitigate it by having someone play the alter ego of the team and be the devil's advocate is one mechanism to fight groupthink to some extent.
Yeah, checkpoints for reassessment. So like thinking about not only taking an action to try and resolve this groupthink challenge. And it's one thing to write up the sticky note and put it on your desk on a Wednesday morning, right? But it's another thing to actually go do it. And so I'm really big on, if you're going to write the sticky note, go do it at some point. Obviously it gets prioritized or sequenced somehow with the rest of your backlog, but I think a lot of us find ourselves in the position of note taker, action item taker, or even action item assigner. But like, it's one thing to take the action, but we've actually got to go do it. And so part of going to do many actions, not just this whole figuring out the dark side of work intake groupthink, part of a lot of actions that we take are to follow up at some sort of cadence, whether it's your typical sprint retrospective cadence or otherwise, to make sure that progress has been locked in and we're advancing it to the point where we need to be.
Stefan Wolper's calls that when you have all those wonderful process improvements that you stick on the backlog and work on it and then never get them done, calls it theater. And I tend to buy that we can't let this become theater.
Well, I do have a cape on. Does that count as theater?
Well, I just there's nothing I can do with that cape, man. I just wish I had a Yoda or a Obi-Wan Kenobi sort of cape.
There you go.
Yeah, but I don't. Leveraging both group and individual inputs. So again, we have a rich source, and having been a product owner for large products in the banking industry, if I wasn't talking to my technical folks, if I wasn't drawing upon all of that, I really think I was avoiding making the decisions the best I could, so that when it came time to prioritize, we knew what we were supposed to be able to do as a team. And product owners, that part of that team.
All right, so that brings us to our exercise. Again, our third little exercise time box. So we want you to think about the issues list that you created, think a little bit about the issues that we talked about and presented, think a little bit about the solutions that you came up with. There's definitely a lot of solutions that got posted in the chat, a lot of issues that got posted in the chat, but really what we want to do now is sort of calibrate with how you're thinking about issues and solutions and how we presented some issues and solutions. So we're looking for similarities, maybe, if we identified similar things, also looking for some differences. And so it'd be great if you thought, maybe we can unmute some folks and they can share similarities between the issues and solutions you came up with and we came up with, and maybe differences as well. Can we go back to the other slide? Joe asked if we could go back one slide just to take a look at the solutions. We can definitely do that.
At least I think I can.
You did it. It's there. So did we come up with the same things that you guys came up with? Were there some differences?
Well, I saw a bunch that I really liked.
Yeah. I think our list just got longer.
Yeah.
Okay, Lauren said leveraging both group and individual inputs was a shared solution. Cool.
I like Samantha. No theater, but sci-fi. Yeah, sometimes it is science fiction, isn't it?
It kind of can be. Computer science fiction.
Well,
computer sci-fi.
Could you see Alien matched in there? Yeah.
Potentially. Yeah, well, that as Jamie dropped in the chat, we'll definitely send the slides out afterwards or make them available somehow. Structured decision-making frameworks versus decentralized decision-making is the difference I see. Can you tell us more, Samantha?
Okay, so if you had this structured decision-making, it's like a ladder. So it goes up one level and then up. So it's really not very efficient. Whereas if you're empowering and giving armor the people that who actually are doing everyday work and makes these small decisions, that's why it's called decentralized decision making, where they can make all these little small decisions, then they're able to actually do work more efficiently and faster. So when it comes to making a big decision, right? Yes, of course, that has to go to leadership or C-suite, whoever is on top making this kind of monetary decisions or like strategy decisions, whatever the cases may be, right? So that decision making should be kind of divided. So I don't 100% agree with the structured decision making, because I have been there where they just go up the ladder, one person up and then another person up and then another person, and until like it just gets bottlenecked. So
Or it's no
Sure.
longer relevant.
Or
yeah,
it's so far
exactly.
extrapolated from things. I guess
Yeah.
when I was thinking about structured decision-making frameworks, I was thinking less about following the org structure to make a decision. I was thinking more about giving teams and groups of people the tools that they can use to make a decision in a structured way.
Oh,
How are
okay.
you thinking? How are you thinking about it, Tom?
Well, I see both sides of this conversation.
Yeah.
So there are tools and tool sets and ideas that allow teams or groups or to make decisions and embed them. And again, there's structure in terms of what's possible and not possible. But there's also the classic hierarchical kind of scenario. Having, as I say, go back to my banking scenario where as a product owner, I reported to a product manager who reported to, someone down on Public Square who then reported over to somebody else. If we were making those decisions, there were a lot of banking products that wouldn't have made it to market. So we packed it down, but we had rules, right? We had rules that said, this is a product decision versus a macro product decision, those sorts of things.
Right. Thanks for the question, Samantha. That was good.
Yeah, Jeremy, I think we're actually talking about the same thing. We're empowering the team to do what they need to do
For sure.
instead of someone on top, with a title is dictate.
Yeah, the hippo.
Yeah, I think we're just using the different words, but I think what you're saying is, what I'm saying. Let the teams do what they need to do and don't micromanage them, right?
Agreed.
Yeah, and then the as I said before, like big decisions, like strategy about how the product is going to launch or whatever. And are we going to spend $250,000 on a particular tool? Because I've been there where platform teams wanted this $250,000 tool.
Yeah.
These kind of things, the leadership needs to get involved, right? So yeah, thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you for this, for the calling out the difference. Any other similarities and differences before we open the floor for questions for a few minutes? Let's do, can we do the last slide, Tom, real quick before we get to our maybe our open floor Q&A? We can talk just very briefly about our book, our cohort class.
Ooh, book. Yes.
The book.
So Mr. Willits and I wrote a book, Mastering Work Intake, and it has a subtitle that our publisher suggested because it made it work in the search results. But it really is a nuts and bolts discussion about not only groupthink, which was, a little tangential, but also how to deal with the whole nuts and bolts of work intake and why, whether it's a team or a department or a product or an organization, why if you get it wrong, you got problems.
Yeah. And so Tom and I got fired up about this topic a few years ago and wrote the book. We've also been doing a class on this. I think Katiana dropped a link in the chat, and if not, we've got it on the slide here, Tom, if you want to advance it to the last slide. We offer an in-depth cohort where we spend 3 hours talking to you about your own work intake challenges. We've done a couple of these. They've been really fun. They're opportunities to build network, but also like we don't spend the whole time talking. We usually do a lot of interactive activities where we really focus on you and the challenges that you need to solve. And we'd like to offer this group a $50 off code of our next one. So we're doing these, I believe, Saturday, November 9th is our next one of these, as well as, I believe, a Friday in December. So if you click that QR code, you'll be directed to the maven.com website. You can sign up for our mailing list. You could either join one of these workshops right away, but we want to give you a discount code because we do like this group. This is our second time here. We had a great time today. And yeah, maybe the guy with 3 arms voted for that.
Just saying, I like 3 arms.
Yeah, the whole idea of raffling off a free copy, yeah, we can do that. If Jamie, if you want to send us like the list of people that came, we can pick a name out of the hat and reach out to the person.
Yeah, we can do that.
It'll be an electronic version.
It will be, but we have electronic codes that we can share. So yeah,
Yeah.
good idea, Bruce. Thanks for the poke.
Perfect.
Last
Love
time
it.
I tried to give away a paper one, it was I had to figure out how to mail it to India. It was a good time. It's possible.
So thank you so much for attending. I know this is during lunchtime for a lot of folks or in the early afternoons. I really appreciate you all taking your time to join us. We had a good time talking about this topic, and this is a really great group to get in front of. You don't just sit there on mute and let us talk and ad lib. You like ask us critical questions and participate. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Tom. It's been delightful having you with us today. We didn't have very many questions in the chat, but we did have 1 or 2. I know we just have 1 minute left, but I think we could probably get to most of them. One was, what was the name of your podcast? And if you had a link you could share.
Software Process and Measurement Cast, and I will get a link while Jeremy's answering the next question.
Yeah.
The next question up was, what did you mean when you were talking about doing your retro with the Eisenhower metrics, saying that you did it without a safety net?
Oh, I think Tom was talking about doing planning without a safety net, and I'll assume what Tom means as he's trying to drop this link in the chat. I would guess that Tom probably ad-libbed this particular approach and decided to pick this tool out of his proverbial toolbox and took a chance to use this technique with a specific team.
I've done a lot of legal support, and I was taught very early on that one should have a really good understanding, or at least a good expectation of what the answer would be if one did it. I knew there was a problem. I was there helping. I knew there was a problem. I didn't know what the problem was. So there was a degree of danger in terms of the outcome.
There you go.
Very...
Bruce, can we answer Bruce's question? Is society's overusage of the word right while speaking contributing to the groupthink problem? It's getting a little carried away. I can't respond to that by saying right, Bruce. just wouldn't be right.
Oh, you're just going all in on that one, man.
I had a feeling that was coming.
Yep. Wonderful.
Words are problems sometimes.
And
right?
words are powerful. All right. Well, thank you to all of you for coming that came today, joined us today. We appreciate you. Thanks for being part of our community. We hope to see you back again. If you have any suggestions on speakers you'd like to see, reach out to me. We see if we can do it. Tom, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us again. And we'd love to have you back again sometime. We really get a lot of value out of you so graciously sharing your knowledge and time with us. So appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Bye, everybody.